Mothman, one of the most famous cryptids in history. It first started showing up in 1966 in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, described as a large, humanoid figure with glowing red eyes and massive, bat-like wings. People often associate Mothman with the Silver Bridge collapse of 1967, which killed 46 people. Witnesses reported seeing Mothman flying near the bridge shortly before it fell. But there were multiple sightings before that, which we're gonna go into full detail on. The legend of Mothman gained widespread attention thanks to John Keel's book, The Mothman Prophecies, which explores several Mothman sightings. It's hard to put yourself in the shoes of someone from that time and place and imagine being genuinely afraid of this creature. Today, the sightings are mostly written off as a case of misidentification mixed with mass hysteria, but could there be more to the Mothman sightings than that? Did this creature really exist? Was it a mutated animal, an extraterrestrial, or some type of paranormal entity, a dark harbinger of doom? Let's dive into some of these reports. The first recorded sighting of Mothman happened on November 12, 1966, near Calendon, West Virginia. 5 gravediggers were working in a cemetery when they saw something unusual. The men hadn't been expecting to spot what would go on to be one of the most famous monsters in history, but that's exactly what happened. They claimed they saw a strange shape in the trees nearby. They just stared for a while, trying to make out what this thing was. Was it a large owl? They couldn't make it out, but they could tell it was pretty sizable. Then it flew up, and they got a much better look at it, but were even more confused as to what this thing was. As the strange winged creature lifted off from the tree line, it was clear that this was no ordinary bird. It had humanoid arms and legs, but this first sighting is by no means the most famous or shocking sighting of the creature. This was just the beginning. Now, we can't talk about Mothman without talking about the TNT area. The TNT area is officially called the West Virginia Ordnance Works. It's an abandoned munitions depot just north of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, dating back to World War II, when it was used to produce ammunition and dynamite. Today, the area is mostly forested, with a mix of open clearings and old concrete storage buildings called igloos, which is where the gunpowder was kept. There are also a bunch of abandoned tunnels, though many of these have collapsed or filled with water over the years. The TNT area is now part of the McClintock Wildlife Management Area, which means it's a protected natural space. But this wasn't always the case. By 1979, fishermen in the area noticed that chemicals from the old munitions had leached into the ponds. By 1983, the TNT area was known as one of the most polluted sites in the United States. So, it's very interesting that a good number of Mothman sightings happened in this area. Roger and Linda Scarberry sightings of Mothman are probably the most famous aside from the Silver Bridge sightings. On November 15th of 1966, just 3 days after the first sighting in the cemetery, Roger, Linda, and another couple, Steve and Mary Millette, were driving through the TNT area around midnight. Linda noticed 2 large glowing red eyes near the Old North power plant and screamed. When Roger stopped the car, they claimed to see a 7-foot humanoid figure with wings folded against its back. The creature then spread its wings and started chasing their car down Highway 62 at speeds of over 100 miles per hour. The 4 were terrified, and once they finally made it to Point Pleasant, they parked, trying to make sense of what they'd just seen. Had they actually encountered a monster, or had they just spooked themselves and completely overreacted? They were so confused and desperate for answers that they decided, you know what, let's just go back there. Let's see if what we saw was just a big owl and our minds were playing tricks on us. They drove back towards the TNT area, and sure enough, they spotted the thing again. As their headlights hit it, the creature took off straight up into the air and disappeared over the trees. The next day, the Scarberrys reported their encounter to Sheriff George Johnson and Deputy Miller Halstead. Police searched for the creature, but there was no sign of it. The story hit the local press, though, with the November 16th edition of the Point Pleasant Register featuring the headline, "Couple Sees Man-Sized Bird, Creature, Something." The sighting was so traumatizing for Linda that she had a nervous breakdown and was rushed to the hospital, and Roger Scarberry claimed that as hard as he was to scare, the encounter had scared him deeply. Some of the creepiest claims about Mothman came from a man named Newell Partridge. After the Roger and Linda Scarberry story came out, more and more Mothman reports started coming in. The police were very confused and understandably skeptical about the whole thing, including Mason County Sheriff George Johnson, the sheriff who Roger, Linda, and the other couple first told about the creature. Johnson thought a lot of the people were spotting probably just a large heron. Newell Partridge came to Johnson with his own bizarre encounter with the creature though, saying that one night he'd aimed a flashlight at a creature he saw in a field by his home and described the creature's eyes as glowing like bicycle reflectors. Partridge also had been noticing some strange buzzing noises coming from what he thought was his television. He hadn't been able to figure out what was going on, but he'd begun to think that whatever that creature was could have been making the sound. His German Shepherd had also gone missing, which he also suspected Mothman may have been responsible for. But now we come to probably the eeriest appearance of Mothman, one that multiple witnesses reported seeing, a large winged creature flying over the Silver Bridge just before it collapsed. On December 15th, 1967, the Silver Bridge, which connected Point Pleasant, Gallipolis, Ohio, suddenly gave way. The collapse killed 46 people. Oddly though, in the days leading up to the disaster, which was just over a year since the very first report, there were multiple Mothman sightings around this bridge. Witnesses reported seeing the creature flying near or hovering over the bridge, and some even claimed that Mothman was seen on the bridge itself. And people began to form this connection between the tragic bridge collapse and Mothman himself, as if the creature may have had something to do with it. And that's gonna bring us into some theories about what Mothman might be. Could Mothman be something of a supernatural entity, a harbinger of doom? This idea usually gets mentioned when talking about the creature's appearance by the bridge, as if it had shown up as a warning that something terrible was about to happen. Interestingly, this is not the only time people saw a large winged creature in the days leading up to a disaster. Take Chernobyl, for example. In the days leading up to the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear disaster, and even in the aftermath, a number of people claimed to have seen a mysterious creature near the plant. This creature became known as the Blackbird of Chernobyl and was described looking pretty similar to Mothman, with glowing red eyes and a large wingspan. And the people who saw it reported feeling this deep sense of dread and would be plagued by vivid nightmares in the following nights. Some people even think Mothman and the Blackbird of Chernobyl could be the same creature. Some UFO enthusiasts think that Mothman might be an extraterrestrial being rather than a mythical creature or misidentified animal though. And I mean, yeah, when locals suddenly start reporting about a 7-foot-tall winged monster with glowing red eyes, and the only explanation skeptics are giving them is, oh well, it's just a big owl. That's just not very convincing, is it? Especially because these folks are very familiar with what animals live in their area. So, an alien? I get the assumption. Mothman's unusual appearance could point to it coming from somewhere beyond Earth. Another thing that adds to this theory are the rumors about encounters with men in black. According to some witnesses, mysterious men in black suits showed up, telling them to keep quiet about what they'd seen, which is something you don't normally hear about with Bigfoot sightings. Men in black tend to show up when UFOs and aliens are involved. So could there have been a secretive investigation going on that the government was trying to cover up? Potentially. And of course, there's the theory that Mothman is actually an undiscovered animal or an odd mutation of some kind. Cryptid is a creature that's rumored to exist but hasn't been scientifically proven. According to this idea, Mothman could be a rare or unknown species that's managed to stay mostly hidden. Some people also think that the pollution in the TNT area where Mothman was frequently sighted could play a role in this as well. I mentioned before that the TNT area was used for storing and manufacturing explosive during World War II, and that by the early 80s, it had become known as one of the most polluted sites in the country. Could this environmental damage have mutated something, creating a creature altered by the toxic chemicals in the area? Very comic booky for sure, but is it any stranger sounding than a mystical entity who shows up in times leading up to horrific disasters? Well, some would say that all of this sounds completely far-fetched and insane. While we still don't have any definitive explanations for what these sightings could have been, there are, of course, your more grounded theories. One skeptic, Joe Nickel, thinks that Mothman sightings could be explained by owls. Owls' eyes can shine brightly in the dark, and their silhouettes do kind of look like the headless Mothman described by witnesses. Since owls are nocturnal and can make some pretty surprising appearances, their eyes shine and their shape could be mistaken for something else, but personally, I'm not sure about the owl thing. Every witness claimed that what they saw was a massive creature, often around 7 feet tall. How would you mistake an owl for a 7-foot tall, red-eyed monster? Unless, of course, people were lying for attention. Another theory comes from wildlife biologist Dr. Robert L. Smith at West Virginia University. He argued that the creature could have been a sandhill crane, a large bird with a wingspan of about 7 feet. Sandhill cranes have reddish coloring around their eyes, apparently, which could match descriptions of Mothman, but some still think that these Mothman sightings were just too bizarre to be chalked up to normal animals. So, what do you all think? Let me know down in the comments. And with that said, I've been your host, James. I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.